The political fight over the Epstein Files has escalated, with both the House and Senate overwhelmingly voting to force their release. President Trump, after repeatedly dismissing the matter as a Democratic hoax, relented to the inevitable outcome. Jeffrey Epstein was a wealthy financier who was convicted in 2008 of soliciting prostitution from a minor. He was later indicted in 2019 on much broader federal sex trafficking charges. Lawmakers and Epstein's victims want the files released so that others involved in the scheme can be exposed and held to account. Democrats argue President Trump is hiding information that could implicate him. While newly released emails from Epstein's estate show multiple prominent Democrats remained in contact with him long after his 2008 conviction. Trump, who cut off his association with Epstein before that, has denied wrongdoing and has directed the Justice Department to investigate prominent Democrats who have been named in those emails. The central questions are how much of this fight is political theater, and what the files will actually reveal once they're made public. I'm Lindsay McPherson, Capitol Hill reporter for The Washington Times, and this is our Q&A on the Epstein Files. So the Epstein Files have been in the news for a while, but are prominently in the news this week because of the House and Senate voting to pass a bill that will require the Justice Department to release all its case files related to Jeffrey Epstein. This process has been underway in Congress for months. A bipartisan duo of House members, Ro Khanna of California, who's a Democrat, and Thomas Massie of Kentucky, who's a Republican, had filed a discharge petition on this bill theirs to try to get 218 signatures to force a vote on this bill because Republican leaders did not want to bring it to the floor. And so they had been working on for months on that, and they finally got the final signature last week when Adelita Grijalva was sworn into Congress and became the last signature on the petition. And it's also in the news this week because Trump, who had been pushing against this effort for months, his White House had actually tried to get lawmakers to take their names off the discharge petition. Trump finally said he would allow House Republicans to support it, so it kind of just created this new momentum against some of the Republican resistance over this, and they now are going to be forced to release the files for this new law. So the bill that was passed specifically asked for all of Epstein's flight logs, his travel records, names of entities and individuals with known or alleged ties to Epstein's trafficking or financial network, information on immunity deals or other legal settlements that he may have been involved in, any communications on the Justice Department decision not to bring charges up until they did in 2019, any notes or metadata concerning the destruction or concealment of documents or other evidence. They're trying to see both who was involved in the sex trafficking scheme as well as any efforts from the federal government to cover it up in the years that it was not prosecuted. There are some exemptions for the release of files. The bill provides exemptions for child sexual abuse materials, personally identifiable information of the victims, for example. But for the most part, it wants all the files released and unclassified to the degree that any are classified. There have been documents released already because the House Oversight Committee had launched its own investigation into the Epstein files in which they subpoenaed the Justice Department for the files that this bill now mandates they release. And they also subpoenaed Epstein's estate. So they've had a couple batches of releases totaling tens of thousands of pages. One batch was from the Justice Department, and those records had a lot of redactions. Lawmakers said that a lot of these were already in the public domain, so didn't find a ton of new information. But the emails from the Epstein estate contain some new revelations and I think have been more instructive in the investigation so far. And that's kind of where all these latest kind of allegations on whether Trump is implicated or Democrats are implicated have been swirling from those emails. The latest release of emails do contain some prominent Democratic names, and Republicans have pointed to some of those as examples that they might have had ties to Epstein's that were previously unknown. One that's come up is Stacey Plaskett. She is the delegate to the U.S. Virgin Islands. So she's a member of the House, but a non-voting representative. And so she was Epstein's congresswoman. When he was alive, he owned a private island in the Virgin Islands, and that's where allegedly a lot of his sex trafficking crimes occurred. Taylor. She knew him as a constituent, but also he had donated to her campaign. And they were found to be, according to these latest release of emails, and there were some text messages in there, texting during a 2019 congressional hearing in which she was questioning former Trump fixer Michael Cohen. So Republicans have pointed to that as suspicious and want to investigate it further. They've even tried to censure her this week on the House floor, but that effort failed. So that's one example of Democrats' names coming up in the files. There was another email that named Hakeem Jeffries, but it was a fundraising solicitation. Jeffries has said he never knew Epstein. The email was from a fundraising firm, working on his behalf that mentioned him, but it's not like he sent it personally. There are other prominent Democrats who've been known for a while to have associations with Epstein at points in time, including former President Bill Clinton and former Obama economic advisor Larry Summers. Their names have come up in some of these emails as well and are among people that Trump wants the Justice Department to investigate, as well as Democratic donor Reid Hoffman and other people in Democratic circles. Oversight Democrats had pointed to a few in which Trump was mentioned, by Epstein specifically. One of the emails Democrats surfaced from Epstein said Trump spent hours at his house with one of the sex trafficking victims. The victim's name was redacted in the version of the email that Democrats released, but Republicans said it was not redacted in the name of the state and that this victim was someone who had been public before and had said that Trump was not involved in any wrongdoing. There was another email Democrats cited in which Epstein said, quote, Trump knew about the girls as he asked Ghislaine to stop. Ghislaine Maxwell was his associate former lover who was involved in recruiting girls and convicted in the sex trafficking scheme. So this email is alleging that Trump knew that she was recruiting girls and asked her to stop. Before Trump announced he would allow House Republicans to vote for the bill to release the Epstein Files, is that he started publicly attacking Marjorie Taylor Greene, said he was going to withdraw his endorsement of her, called her a traitor, and ranting social media posts against her. Marjorie Taylor Greene was one of 4 Republicans who had signed this discharge petition to force the vote on the bill to release the Epstein Files, against the Republican leadership's wishes, against, at that time, the White House's wishes, even though she's long been a close Trump ally. But she did break with Trump on this issue. She says she's standing with the victims. In fact, she argues that it's the MAGA base that really pushed for the release of the Epstein Files, and that is true. It was a big issue in MAGA role because a lot of people will point to why didn't Democrats release the files during the Biden administration? I mean, certainly they potentially could have, but a lot of the push for releasing the files at that time was coming from MAGA and the Republican circles. And Trump campaigned on saying he would release the files as well. So there's a lot of frustration in the MAGA sphere among the public that Marjorie Taylor Greene says she's tapping into, that these files had not been released and that all these Republican promises about releasing them if Trump took back the White House, were kind of ignored. Trump had also been attacking Thomas Massie, who was the lead Republican sponsor of the bill, but he's also had issues with him for a while because Massie voted against his one big beautiful bill with the tax cuts. So there's a lot of infighting occurring because of this, and at the end of the day, there was only one House Republican who voted against the bill. His name is Clay Higgins. He's from Louisiana, but the rest of the Republicans ended up voting for this. However, Mike Johnson, the House Speaker, had wanted some changes to be made to the bill in the Senate because it had gone through the discharge petition in the House. They weren't able to amend it, and he was concerned that the bill's language wasn't strong enough in protecting victims and that there were other legal guardrails needed to protect people who might be named in the files. And the Senate declined to make any changes, even if this bill becomes law, do the files get released? So because Trump instructed the Justice Department to open investigations into prominent Democrats who are named in some of these emails, there are now active investigations related to Epstein. I think one of the questions I have, and I would like to get answered from lawmakers, is why there haven't been any more releases from the oversight subpoena from the Department of Justice since the first batch in September. So they subpoenaed the Justice Department for this over the summer. They got an initial release from the Justice Department that they released in the beginning of September. Here we are near the end of November and nothing else from the Justice Department. They have had these releases from the Epstein estate, and that's noteworthy. Why hasn't the Justice Department complied further with the subpoena? That's a big lingering question that I think should be answered as well. I'm Lindsay McPherson, Capitol Hill reporter for the Washington Times. To learn more, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel or read thewashingtontimes.com.